What makes a good game soundtrack is somewhat different than what makes a good song. Every game with an iconic soundtrack is remembered not only for the quality of their individual tracks, but for what sets them apart. When Boneworks launched onto the stage in 2019, it made waves, primarily for its cutting-edge physics system, but also for its soundtrack, which many called an instant classic, even better than the game itself. By the time Bonelab rolled around, the expectation was set, and the anticipation for the soundtrack was on par with the hype for the game. But on September 29th, both caught players off guard, with many falling in love, but some experiencing expectational whiplash. Bonelab and Boneworks are very different games, despite sharing the same core, and the soundtracks seem to reflect this. Bonetones, Boneworks' soundtrack's atmosphere is specifically composed to reflect the setting of the game, an AI-generated, mostly empty, semi-finished virtual city from the 90s built on a mysterious force known as the Void. It is eerie, epic, intriguing, and uncanny. Bonetones is amazingly consistent, relying on semi-improvised analog synths, addictive drum loops, and repeating, slowly swelling tunes. The synth acts as a sonic through-line, reflecting both the 90s era and the digital nature of the setting. Songs are allowed to branch off over time depending on specific level or encounter, but retain the general DNA and overall energy, meaning everything is constrained to a level of familiarity. Most songs are slowly paced, with plenty of time to get the listener familiar with its identity as they meander through the world. They suggest a mindset to adopt for the level they play in, and coupling this with the thematically apt synth selection, you see why the commenter before called it a great genre match. Listen to the museum, which plays during the tutorial level as you discover how the physics system works and are allowed to play with a number of weapons and objects with no threat of death. It's a light and airy track, playful and curious, a perfect match for the sense of discovery you experience in this section. As you advance to your final destination, the songs adapt without losing that edge. Here's What Am I, which plays the first time you get a close view of your objective, the clock tower. There's a weight and sense of importance here. You know that you're only a couple steps away from the Void. It's almost diegetic, as if the music is part of the world itself and simply bends depending on where you find yourself in it. Michael Wyckoff mentioned that in production he improvised a lot, and while I doubt this is intentional, I have to think that intuitive flow contributes to this feeling that the world is birthing the music, rather than a composer prescribing an exact storyboard for a game with limitless possibilities. But this remarkable feeling of connection between songs is perhaps made strongest by Bonetones' most notorious element, the Boneworks leitmotif. A leitmotif is a short, recurring musical phrase associated with a particular person, place, or idea. It is a simple tool, but a powerful one. Get the leitmotif in a person's head, and they will forever associate it with the web of songs it is contained within. Find a place to put these notes, or some variation on them, and no matter what, that song will exist within all other songs using the same tune. All the atmosphere and emotion built up throughout the soundtrack simply compounds and gets better as these notes continue to play and remind you of everything that came before and is yet to come. To me, these notes evoke several emotions at once, and depending on the song, it will evoke some more than others as the leitmotif is adapted and recontextualized. completely different and yet the same. By the time the end credits roll and you hear those notes for the final time, it carries the weight of the entire game. Bonetones is inextricably linked to Boneworks and to itself. You cannot think of one song without thinking of the full experience. Predictability combined with a pleasant diversity and a healthy helping of nostalgia makes for an extremely beloved product. Boneworks nailed that. And Bonelab is not Boneworks. Now, to be clear, I think Bonelab's soundtrack, Lab Jams, is amazing. The song you're listening to right now is from it, and it has all the hallmarks of Bonetones. In fact, I think it's a better action companion than any of Bonetones' tracks. Granted, at the cost of some ambiance, and with a slightly more polarizing tinge of experimentation. There's a guitar solo, but those aren't bad things, they're just different. And different is the name of the game here. While Bonetones focused on an almost rigid consistency, which worked fine with the fairly linear journey of Arthur Ford, Bonelab's is decidedly more confused in its direction. Is it a campaign, a VR Gmod, a modding platform? Jack of all trades, master of none, Bonelab brings immersive physics to the quest while setting up a solid foundation for future titles without fully committing to any of its individual elements. This makes a coherent soundtrack difficult to imagine, so Michael Wyckoff took this limitation and used it as an opportunity. If Bonelab's identity is evanescent, then Lab Jams can be as well. We're still in a virtual world powered by the Void, so synth should remain a major player, but it's hard to tell sometimes, with the settings now more varied and following fewer restrictions than Boneworks, so Wyckoff can stretch the boundaries, playing with more vocals, instruments, and genres. Beyond their stylistic approach, Bonelab also takes direct inspiration from other franchises at times, giving Wyckoff full license to abandon all presuppositions. Everyday Castle is clearly inspired by Inside the Castle Walls from Mario 64, because the corresponding level is Mario-themed. And when you drive the go-kart in that level, drifting around corners in search of better lap times, Initial D-esque Eurobeat. Rooftops is inspired by The Matrix, On the Moon is a reference to an internet meme, and Don't Fence Me In is literally a cover of an old Western song.
Oh, give me land, lots of land, under starry skies above. Don't fence me in, let me ride through the wide open country that I love. Don't fence me in, let me be by myself.
If we can say Bonelab is a jack of all trades and a master of none, the same may be said about Lab Jams. Clocking in at over double the runtime with twice as many songs and with severely split vision, Lab Jams was just never going to be that coherent. It was never going to achieve that unmistakable identity that Boneworks developed. I mean, a lot of what made Bonetones good on paper applies to Lab Jams as well. It features synth, it has a lot of the same motifs. There's even a new Bonelab leitmotif. But most people I talked to didn't notice it. What they noticed instead was when the old Boneworks motif played. So it's tempting to take all this and say Bonetones was better, and it definitely is if those are the qualities you're looking for, or if you want a soundtrack to put on shuffle. But I think everything should be taken in context and reviewed for what it's trying to achieve. Lab Jams, for what it is pretty spectacular. The variety is playful. It's a soundtrack that can pay homage to stories, musicians, and culture, that allows its artists to experiment and craft music hyper-tailored to specific levels, specific encounters, maps, modes. There's something Lab Jams does that feels really special to me. It's a small detail. On Spotify it's confined to just one song. But when you're in the lab, where you can walk to doors to each mode, sandbox, arena, tactical trial, parkour, experimental, and mods, as you near them, a unique song will fade in, a little stinger composed just for that door. It's completely unnecessary. Those songs will never sell the game. They'll never convince somebody that the game is good or bad. But Michael took the time to do them anyway. He bothered to add this little touch that fills out the world just a little more, that makes everything feel just a little more real.